Good morning to our viewers and participants. Welcome to this online discussion, Supporting Democracy, Women in Leadership, Equality and Empowerment in Europe. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Katie O'Connor. I am representing the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, UK and Ireland. This is the first in a three-part series of events together with European Movement Ireland in 2022, all of which will focus on the theme of supporting democracy. We all have an important role, individually and collectively, to support each other to build a peaceful future in functioning democracies. We see this now with the support for Ukraine and its people, and there is much more to be done. In the words of Konrad Adenauer, we all live under the one sky, but we don't all have the same horizon. Thank you to those who work selflessly and tirelessly on our behalf to ensure that our values are represented, to promote a safe, just, and equal society. I am pleased to welcome 4 such public representatives to today's discussion and look forward to hearing from them. Starting with Frances Fitzgerald, Member of the European Parliament, Vice President of the EPP Group in the European Parliament, former Taoiseach. Annette Wiedmann-Maus, Member of the German Bundestag, Federal Chairwoman of the CDU Women's Union, Member of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Bundestag, former Minister of State to the Federal Chancellor. Ava Maedel, Member of the European Parliament, President of European Movement International. And Noel O'Connell, CEO of European Movement Ireland, National Citizens Representative to the Conference on the Future of Europe. Noel will chair today's discussion. There is plenty to discuss. The EU has a vital role in supporting gender equality, the role of women in multilateralism and geopolitics, particularly in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We, the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, are a political foundation who promote peace, freedom, and European values. The foundation are very happy to have cooperated with European Movement Ireland for a number of years now, focusing on mutual challenges, friendships, and cooperation in Europe and internationally. We look forward to continuing this cooperation. Noel, many thanks. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Katie, for those warm words of introduction. And I think you've set the stage perfectly for our discussion this morning on supporting democracy, women in leadership, equality and empowerment in Europe. And I'm honoured to have such a distinguished panel of expert speakers presenting to this vital and important topic. A very warm welcome to our webinar this morning. Ourselves in European Movement Ireland, we're delighted to be collaborating with Katie and her colleagues in the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. We've had an incredibly successful programme of engagement last year in 2021, and I'm really looking forward to the publication of a report on last year's collaboration on the themes of assessing Ireland's global future and key international relationships, which ourselves and CAS will be publishing on our websites later this week. So time and time again, we have heard of the founding fathers of European integration, but one woman played a leading role in being a champion for European women's rights. And that was Simone Veil, the first president of the European Parliament after elections in 1979. And she spoke of, and I quote, "My demand as a woman is that my difference be taken into account so that I am not forced to adapt to a male model," end quote. And it is somewhat unfortunate that her words still ring true today as that journey for gender equality in Europe continues, decades after she was president of the European Parliament. The effectiveness of our democracies in Europe are measured by our abilities at including women, at empowering women and supporting women in places such as decision-making bodies, public institutions, political parties, government departments, and civil society organizations. And as we witness the unfolding tragedy in Ukraine due to Russia's invasion of it, women are all too often absent from global political decisions. But it is women who feel the full force of these actions all too often, as we watch in horror the plight of so many Ukrainian women and children who are caught up in the current war. And to echo the sentiments of Irish President Michael D. Higgins on the war in Ukraine, which I know will be shared with all of us here today, that every glimmer of hope through diplomacy must be seized in order to achieve peace. But now back to today's event. I have the honour of being the moderator, and the way we're going to structure this morning's panel discussion is that each member of the panel will have an opportunity to present their opening remarks before we follow on by a panel discussion and then finish with an audience Q&A. So we've already had some questions in, which is fantastic, but if you would like to send a question in to the distinguished panel, please feel free to email them to my colleagues at events@europeanmovement.ie. And for those of you active on social media, please feel free to use the hashtags EMICAS and hashtag supporting democracy. So that is all the social media housekeeping and running order done. So without further ado, moving to our first distinguished speaker this morning, whom Katie already outlined Francis's bio. But we are very honoured, Francis, to have you joining us. And I think you're joining us from Dublin this morning before heading to Brussels. So a very warm welcome to you, and you have the virtual floor.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to see you, Noel, and of course, Katie representing Konrad-Adenauer. Thank you for hosting this discussion. Sadly, in a way, it was never so appropriate, and what a changed context probably from when you thought about having this very important discussion about gender equality and democracy. The context, of course, I think we can call it good and evil. We can call it democracy versus authoritarianism. You know, women and children leaving men cogs in the machine of war. And never was it more important to discuss how democracy develops, the limits of democracy, the challenges to democracy in such a very stark way. Let me begin by saying that gender equality and democracy are inextricably linked. Many don't necessarily see it as an obvious correlation. I think that's changing somewhat, but we can never say it often enough, because globally, there is huge cause for concern. And we won't have time to go into all of the details here. Suffice it to say that, you know, representationally, there are huge issues around the world, gender-based violence, enormous issues, and so on. The list does go on in terms of new forms of gender-based violence, cybercrime, fake news, and so on, which I will mention later. So a huge amount of work to do. And I suppose as somebody who's worked on gender equality for about 30 years, at one point I was saying, well, really, I thought this would have changed. But actually, what you see are developments, improvements, and then new areas that need attention and some old areas that are very resistant to change. But great to see a new generation of young women and men taking up many of those issues. But let's return to Ukraine for a moment. Obviously, Ukrainian women and men are taking to the front line to defend their country. They're obviously, I would say, and in the context of this morning's discussion, to say they are not just, of course, defending themselves and their own beliefs. They are defending the very core of our European Union, the very core of it: human rights, democracy, the rule of law. These are our European values, and right at their very heart is gender equality. As I said in the Parliament 2 weeks ago, not an add-on, not an extra, but essential, quintessentially European. And I think it surprises me still how often one has to fight seeing it as an add-on, other people seeing it as an add-on, last on the agenda, as opposed to mainstreaming and further progressing it. But I think, you know, the tragedy is unfolding before us, with women, you know, trying to escape bullets and missiles, houses destroyed, cities destroyed. I mean, we're really seeing a 20th century war in the 21st century, and the images really are so profound and so hard for us to take in. And I think we feel at times in our democracies somewhat helpless, despite everything we're doing, because the scale of the destruction is so enormous. the temptation is always to go further, and yet we know the consequences of that. So it's a very real discussion about military intervention, I think, at this point. Whether it happens or not in a further way from our democracies, everybody is kind of looking at both sides of that argument and trying to get comfortable around it, or in fact becoming increasingly uncomfortable in many ways. But of course, the women in Ethiopia, the women of Yemen, the women of Belarus, and so the list goes on. We look at what's happening to frontline female defenders all across the world. This is just 1 year of women in some of the worst places to be a woman, no doubt about that. Now imagine the rest. Even in the best places to be a woman, as I have said, there is a lot of unfinished business. In each of these places and in each of these experiences, the task of finding peaceful solutions is at the core, at the top of the agenda. The UN, the US, G7, NATO. If we are to have a sustainable and meaningful peace, we cannot just have, of course, have women working from the ground up. They need to be at the top of our decision-making fora. And as someone who has attended the UN and seen the complete lack of women at the top of international meetings, this is a serious problem, reflected in the UN, reflected in our international organizations, of course, reflecting many of our member states in terms of critical mass. So we still have the work to do around critical mass. Of course, supporting Ukrainian women is essential at this point. But we must have women at the negotiating table, involved in both military and diplomatic channels. That's necessary if we were to move towards a lasting peace. We've seen the work of women in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Afghanistan, in Ethiopia, in Belarus, and in Northern Ireland, shown the importance of women in conflict resolution, yet it's hard to get to that point. But we do need women at the table to build a secure and safe future for all of us, including Ukrainians. Just to make a point that against this worrying backdrop, isn't it interesting how little, and one understands, given the enormity of what's happening, how little gender equality can be mentioned, very rarely mentioned in high-level communications about any of these situations. After summits, for example, very rarely. Obviously, we talk about defense and strategic geopolitical issues. They take center stage. But we must really hit home how much gender equality is at the core, because if you want to have reliable partners, what's very clear, it will be those countries who understand gender equality and work to make our democracies more equal. We have unfinished democracies. I don't have time to go into the detail of the economic costs, but I'm increasingly looking at the economic costs of not having gender equality within Europe and worldwide. They're extraordinarily high. Let me just give you one figure. Improving gender equality by 2050 would boost EU GDP by between 1.95 trillion and 3.1 trillion, according to the European Institute for Gender Equality. Boosting women in STEM, AI, and digital can potentially give a 16 billion annual boost to EU GDP. These are incredible returns to our economies. And I think we need to discuss the economic upside to equality much more. The best firms recognize this, of course. And in our money that we're giving to our member states at the moment, we have to be sure in the RRF that money trickles down, make sure that it deals with care issue, make sure that it deals with new training for women so they can take up those jobs of the future and deal with the 49% pension. I've seen in my own career the difference in a cabinet, having 2 people, 3 people, 4 or 5 women in a cabinet out of 15 men or so. I mean, it's really, the critical mass is essential. So let's always try and get this in all the fora all of us are engaged in. Whether it's the cabinet table or the company board. Let me make one final point, and that's about disinformation and fake news. Eva would be very familiar with this in the European Parliament as well. I think we have completely underestimated disinformation and fake news, complete new awareness in relation to it during the course of this war in Ukraine. But actually, I believe that none of our member states, our institutions, the EU institutions, have put the sort of resources in. And it's hard to imagine the impact that disinformation has had on all our democracies and has really impacted hugely within our country. So that is something that we have to take extraordinarily seriously and devote far more resources to. Democracy is under severe threat around the world. from authoritarian regimes in a rapidly changing 21st century. And of course, Ireland and the EU, all of us, have an absolute responsibility to continuously advocate for the advancement of fundamental human rights. There's no place for ambiguity, respect for human dignity and the rule of law, with gender equality, as I said, at its core. Thanks again for the invitation to join with you this morning, and I look forward to hearing from colleagues and to the discussion. Thank you very much, Noelle.
Thanks a million, Frances, for that tour de force. I couldn't help but be struck by that shocking statistic you mentioned, even just 1.95 to 3 trillion euros potential boost to EU GDP with that economic upside to gender equality. I mean, it really does say it all, and how much more the EU can and should be doing in this regard. And I'm now delighted to, turning from Dublin to Berlin, really delighted to welcome our next distinguished speaker this morning, Annette Wiedmann-Maus, a member, apologies, Annette, I was promoting you there, member of the Bundestag and federal chairwoman of the Women's Union of the CDU in Germany. Annette, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Noelle, and thank you very much to Kate and the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation for organizing this panel discussion following International Women's Day. I am very grateful for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the following exchange with the colleagues and the participants. The United Nations dedicated the 8th of March in the 70s to women's rights and world peace. First of all, please let me state you, although this annual Memorial Day has been initiated by socialist and communist women in the times before the First World War, it's still so important to remember the long and rocky path to equality and women's rights, such as the suffrage, and it is so relevant to show the lack in equality between women and men in payment, pensions, caregiving, financing, economic and democratic representation and decision-making. The feminists in the early 20th century fought for social, legal and political rights. They raised their voices, they strived for voting, just to have a choice. In these days, the last 26 days, Ukrainian women only have one choice: the decision between two horrible possibilities. Either to stay in a country full of pride and resistance, violence and destructions, or to leave their homes, husbands, friends and colleagues, and flee with their children and parents in the hope of protection and safety. This situation is caused by the despotic leader Putin violating the international law, surrounded and supported by compliant oligarchs and without any democratic control. This war against Ukraine itself, its territorial sovereignty, its people values and principles of self-determination is a threat against the free world and its rule-based order. The question is, who will win? The right of the strongest or the strength of law? Women are affected when democracy and freedom are threatened. When there's an armed conflict, it's often more dangerous to be a woman than a soldier, said Susana Camareno Benitez, Spain's Secretary of State for Equality and Social Services. And I think these words are more relevant than ever in times of war, of aggression is raging in Europe. Women are affected when democracy and freedom are threatened. Whenever there has been a conflict, women and children have been known to suffer disproportionately during and after the war. Women and children are often the most vulnerable and prone to being hit the hardest. Sexual violence is a weapon of war. Human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and forced prostitution are bitter consequences. Wherever there is a conflict, women must be part of the solution. But women are not just victims in these contexts. They are often the driving force for peace solutions. Involving women in peace negotiations contributes to the quality and the durability of peace. The commitment and engagement of women is indispensable and directional at all levels. Women's engagement in peace processes does not just mean bigger attention to gender-related elements in the deliberations, but also a shift in dynamics, a broadening of the issues discussed, increasing the chances of community buy-in and addressing root causes. Therefore, it is essential to strengthen women's participation in political processes to manage and to prevent conflicts. Women, younger and older, stand up for their convictions with self-confidence and courage. They make public appearance and draw the world's attention with sensitivity and strength. Even this exposes them to violence and reprisals. Maria Ovsyannikova, the Russian heroine of truth, or Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Maria Kolesnikova, and Veronika Tsepkalo, the Belarus civil rights activists, are just a few important actors to name. The increasing participation of women also on the international diplomatic stage, I only name Kamala Harris, Ursula von der Leyen, Roberta Metsola, or Christine Lagarde, is an outstanding achievement because women earn their place on the diplomatic stage. Women deserve a place at the leadership table. Democracy can only succeed with women. Competent and committed women want to take responsibility. They deserve the place at the leadership table. Despite all effort in light of the current circumstances, we haven't reached yet an adequate or at least equal representation. In the German Bundestag, for example, we have to face a serious underrepresentation of women. Women make up more than half of the population, but their share is only 34.7% in our parliament. Their experiences, views, and competencies are still not sufficiently present in political parties, parliament, and ministries. Today, it's no longer just about equal opportunities, but also actual equality. This goal is demanded by the German Basic Law. The state must promote the actual establishment of equal rights and work towards eliminating the existing disadvantages. Political parity is not an end itself, but it benefits the big picture. Numerous studies prove that mixed teams are more successful, not only in politics, also in economics. Many countries have adopted gender parity objectives. But to bring a real change, this is not enough. It's up to us to create a favorable institutional framework and therefore use best practice models. Structural barriers must be removed and legally reliable proposals made. A look at other countries, such as France, shows that binding legal requirements for gender parity are the way to achieve this goal. Last week, we achieved another milestone for equality at the European level. The EU Council took an important step towards greater gender equality in the workplace. The EU directive aiming to strengthen gender equality on corporate boards creates binding standards so that women in the European Union can participate in economic life on an equal level. It is a social development of great significance. Not only do we need the female perspective, increased numbers of women in politics encourage women to stand up for their issues, to contact their own representatives and participate more as citizens. We have the chance to meet some of the most pressing challenges of our time, from economic crisis and lack of health care to climate change, violence against women and escalating conflicts. Women are not only more affected by these problems, but also possesses ideas and leadership to solve them. Gender inequality is still holding too many women back, holding our world back. Women's voices are needed within effective political representation for democracy to work effectively in the interests of all. Exactly for that reason, it is necessary to do everything in our power to impede retraditionalization, or what a very difficult word, and backward-looking policy. The pandemic has had a big impact on this. At the same time, cyber violence attributed to online hate speech has increased worldwide. It is apparent that women are faced with hate comments disproportionately often in a sexual context. In a current German survey from 2021, around 3/4 of respondents said that they had already experienced hate speech on the internet and intimidated.
Annette, sorry, I think you've muted yourself there, Annette. You're still on mute, Annette, there. I think you're still on mute. There we go.
Now, can you
yes,
hear me?
we can hear you now.
So
Thank you.
I've started with the point that it's very important to impede retraditionalization and backward-looking policy. I said the pandemic has had a big impact on this. At the same time, cyber violence attributed to online hate speech has increased worldwide. It is apparent that women are faced with the hate comments disproportionately often in a sexual context. In a current German survey from 2021, around 3/4 of respondents said that they had already experienced hate speech in the internet, and more than half of the women are scared and intimidated. It is up to us to create the structural and political framework to combat that development and to strengthen the networks on all European levels to offer women support and funding. Equal rights, opportunities, and equality for all. These are core goals on the European Union and the EPP. They allow citizens to reach their full potential in a peaceful and prosperous continent. We have every reason to defend these rights and values because they give us more than one choice. Democracy is a valuable asset that must be protected. It can only succeed with women. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Annette. Thank you indeed for that excellent intervention and overview. And now, last but by no means least, I'm delighted to turn to my good friend and my president of EM International, Ava Maedel. And Ava, I don't know if you're joining us from Bulgaria, Brussels, or Strasbourg, but I'm sure you'll tell us. And I'm delighted to have Ava with us this morning. So Ava, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noelle. I joined the virtual floor from Brussels today. I'm very grateful for the invitation and for organizing this event to both Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, but also to European Movement Ireland. I'm also honored to be speaking alongside two women that have really helped forge the path for female leadership. And very valuable points were already made. So I will try to be concise and brief and address perhaps some points that have not been mentioned until now. I would perhaps like to start by saying something that is, I think, very obvious for us. But I think it's also a name in itself. I think women are not equal until all women everywhere are equal. And I think this pursuit of equality and freedom never ends. And when we talk about peace and stability, we see they can be lost in the blink of an eye. And we have seen this before in Afghanistan, and we see this today in Ukraine. War has those really devastating effects on women. And particularly, this is when we see how quickly women can lose access to basic healthcare services, to education, to financial resources. Devastating effects when it comes to that women are often subject in such situation to sexual violence, and that they're the ones that often have to be the ones providing shelter, food, also safety, whether it's to elderly relatives and children in this dangerous situations. We often also see that in the aftermath of war, the future of women are rewritten, and very often this is in the hands of men. I think that if women do not play an active part in making, but also keeping peace, then their experiences and interests will never be sufficiently addressed. Yet I also think that looking at what we've managed to achieve so far, despite, of course, some setbacks that we've had over the past years. I think over the last decade, though, when we look at international organizations, be it NATO, the European Union, UN, governments, NGOs, various organizations in general, I think they have helped significantly increase the equality, the freedom, the opportunities of women across the world. They have really very thoroughly invested in strategies on how to empower women, how to make sure that there's concrete structures to help women in conflict regions and communities. I also think that we have sought also to lead by example. And as Annette mentioned, I'm very proud and happy to see that we have capable, respected women at the helm of the Parliament, of the Commission, the ECB, the IMF, plenty of capable women as head of state and government, but also on local and regional level, we have women mayors of capital cities and so on and so forth. But I think women in top jobs is just it's not just about symbolism. It's far from it, really. I think the value of women in multilateralism, I think it's very clear to us. I think what women bring in this situation is that we have a unique perspective and knowledge of specific needs of women and girls. I think women provide lines of communication in communities and organizations that are not always open to men. And I think also they provide a different way of thinking and a different approach to problems in general. even though I wanted to see the positives, I have to say, there's still much more to be done. And I would like to go through a couple of tools where I think we still need to be making progress. I have thought about 5-6 key areas where we can build upon. And the first one is I would like us to invest more in programs that support best practice for electoral reform and good governance. And we have the Democracy Support and Election Coordination Group in the European Parliament. And I see this as a very good tool which we need to find ways to expand. I think also we need to show that quotas and targets for the number of women in business or in politics is not some sort of a tokenism, but it's an action that can benefit everyone in the respective organization. This is why it will be beneficial to encourage people to examine the procedures of their organization, including working hours, office culture, time of meetings, the available facilities that are there. Thirdly, and that's a very important point for me, and I know we often mention it, but for me it kind of is a prime point to empower women, and it's related to training women, providing more information on campaign methods, on political selection procedures, and also access to financing. I think we need to help women build their own network, their contacts, and most importantly, pair them with mentors. Very often you see insecurity in women, slow decision making. But if you're paired with a mentor, if you're part of a program, I think a lot of those obstacles can be overcome at a very early stage. Another point is related to ending violence against women. This has to be an international priority. And first and foremost, it means adopting a very robust, very concrete, straightforward national legislation, but also international. And we need to help support projects that help those women that have suffered violence against them rebuild their lives. My fifth point is related to pay inequality. This simply cannot continue. We need more transparency. We need more accountability to combat this inequality. I think it's time to bust the myth that having a baby is a career break or a reasonable excuse to prevent a women's career from advancing. We also need to recognize and respect the value and the volume of unpaid work which is carried out by women across all communities. And lastly, I wanted to point on the digital transformation that can transform and can help transform the workplace. I think virtual communication can sometimes help eliminate the cost, the travel time, and some of the obstacles that are related to childcare. We can convene urgent meetings within minutes or rather or hours rather than taking days or weeks. I think the digital tools can really also track democratic progress and whether it's progress, but whether it's also decline across the globe. With unprecedented speed and accuracy. But of course, this is a topic of another conversation. It does require investments in skills, in training, in 5G and so on and so forth. But in conclusion, I think we all agree to the simple truth that equality makes our society simply more fairer, but most importantly, better prepared and more resilient. And this is why I think we all need to play our part to ensure that women's voices are respected, are heard, and of course, acted upon. And this will be vital for the women of Ukraine, I think, in the aftermath of war. All those women, just like us, had plans, had dreams, and those cannot be extinguished. And I think their aspirations cannot be just confined to the past. So I hope we can find ways to prove that democracy and freedom were worth fighting for. And we need to do all we can to simply help them rebuild their lives, move forward, and to perhaps finish up. I would use a phrase that's, so to say, of the moment. I think we must help those women build back better. And I hope that through those discussions that we have, we can find different ways to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ava, for that great intervention. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you have a number of reports that you're launching in the Parliament, so you sadly have to leave us, but we're very grateful to your time and thank you again. And I look forward to seeing you in Brussels in the not too distant future. With all this COVID travel, we haven't managed to meet in person in many years, so hopefully at some stage in the future we will do that. Thanks, Ava. Thank you very much. And now to Frances and Annette, if I may come to you, and just in terms of our panel discussion. So I might ask you both to unmute yourselves, if that's okay. So Annette, we might just get you to unmute yourself there if you can. And I might just ask both of you, just in terms of the long-term consequences as you both see it, in terms of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on women's political representation in Europe. Do you think there would be any lasting impact on that? And I mean, Frances, I might turn to you, and if I could ask you to perhaps respond wearing two hats, in terms of an Irish hat, but also as a member of the European Parliament. And then Annette, I'll come to you. Frances.
Well, I guess the answer to that, Noelle, depends on quite a number of factors. First of all, it depends on a recognition of the impact of COVID-19 has had on women already, the differential impact, and whether that is taken into account enough when the rebuilding comes about. Because, you know, one of the things that I was thinking of saying earlier is that the recovery from COVID is not worth fighting for if it's unequal, if it's, uneven, unequal, or unsustainable. And I think we have to really, first of all, accept there was a differential impact. We have to acknowledge that childcare remained a very serious issue, that working from home was no substitute for childcare, and yet many couples and individuals were expected to cope without the kind of childcare that they needed to combine work and family life. In terms of politics, I'm not sure of the particular effect, except that, I mean, it remains a huge challenge to up the numbers of women in politics. And I think you have again to go back to, confidence. You have to go back to cash, to childcare, getting through conventions, to culture. And if anything, the general consensus, I think, around the world is that COVID threatens equality and has made it tougher to make progress on any one of those issues. So I think this is where the monitoring of the RRF by Europe comes into play very much across the member states, to make sure that the spending of that money increases equality and catches up on any of the deficits during COVID. But it's a big challenge. It certainly hasn't made it easier in any way, Noelle, I would say. In fact, we've really seen during the COVID crisis, the inequalities represented in both those who spoke. The representation issues were quite serious during COVID in terms of seeing women on the media. It took quite a while for the female professionals to emerge, because again, you had hierarchical structures at the top were men, and men did the representation. So, it certainly threw up and highlighted and put a lens on many of the inequalities that are there already. So it's a challenging time, Noelle, I would say.
No, absolutely, Frances. And Annette, I'd be very interested in getting the perspective from Germany. How do you see it?
Yes, we have a big discussion in Germany whether the COVID pandemic brings women forward or there is a backslash. We can see there's a backslash in the role models. So we examined that, and the scientist told us that before the pandemic, parents had a more equal share of caring for the children at home. And now, after or in the ending of the pandemic, we see that most of the obligations were, mostly the women take care of the children. They are the teachers. They are the persons who cared. And but we see another consequences. The women were the first who have to leave their working place because they worked in bad paid professions. They worked in the hotels, in the restaurants, and so on. On the other side, they were the persons who were needed because they were the system relevant persons in healthcare giving, also in childcare, the infrastructures which that were needed. So and the pandemic also gave women new opportunities in working from home with all the opportunities in the working place there in using the ICT and so on. So it was a chance to better combine the work and family life, but also with some difficulties because if they are not present in the companies, so there is the danger that they won't be in progress and could not participate or they cannot go forward also making careers. What in my impression is very hard consequence is the communication. The communication in the internet. People changed their consuming of information, and therefore we see that all the traditional role models are much more promoted, and there we have to work on this. We have to establish a regulation on that, and we are just on the way in the German Parliament to do it, but it's not enough in my opinion. But let me focus on another point. There have been some very special areas where women work in the prostitution. In the first time after the lockdown, we could recognize many women were pushed back to their home countries, and now they look very intensive to fill the prostitution the areas where they work. And now we have to decide, how do we go forward with these aspects of human trafficking, of sex exploitation? So we discuss also the Nordic model, very intensive now, because we have to have a look on the demand. We have to reduce this, and we can only do it if we come to a prohibition of prostitution, not in aspect of the women, but in aspect of the men who demand for these sexual services. And this is also in these days of the war, and where many women have to flee, a very urgent problem now, because the bad men are on the stage, and they want to they use this very hard situation for their profit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you, Annette. Just one point that I think you all raised individually across your interventions. The European Institute for Gender Equality has estimated that the cost of gender-based violence across the EU is 366 billion euros a year. So it's incredible. And violence against women makes up 79% of this cost, amounting to 289 billion. We saw this year with International Women's Day, European Commissioners Vera Jourova, Helena Dalli, marked it with EU-wide legislation compelling member state governments to get tougher on violence against women. Do you think the EU is doing enough in this area, or would you see that more can be done? Frances, I might go to you first.
Well, I mean, let's face it, given the scale of the problem, you can never do enough. So the answer is clearly none of us are doing enough across our member states. Some member states are doing more than others. Some have best practice. I think great credit to Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, for bringing in and really highlighting gender equality amongst her goals, and the new directive on gender-based violence. Given that we have a number of member states, 6 or 7, I think, who have not ratified Istanbul, which in itself is extraordinary. I mean, they see it as a Trojan horse for something else, LGBTQI rights or whatever. Some of them say there's constitutional issues. But now there's going to be a directive. So that is, that's very important. It's a European-wide approach. It means that we are, absolutely being clear. And there's some very innovative parts in that new directive in terms of how we handle violence and supporting victims particularly. So yes, but the member states then have to really act, and we have to do more. I think we need to work more with men, with young men, and all men. I think women have carried the burden of dealing with this for too long. In Ireland, I do see a change in that it's becoming more of a whole of society issue, as opposed to what it was incredibly, I've certainly seen it being a niche issue, if you like, whereas actually it's a whole of society issue and has to be dealt with as such. We've seen a lot of improvements in how police forces handle domestic-based violence, but still a way to go in that, and how we deal with it in our criminal justice law, some good changes, again, more to do. So, I mean, it has never ceased to surprise me how it isn't a greater priority across the world when you consider the personal cost, the economic cost, the social cost, the family cost. Just take FGM, female genital mutilation, which increased during COVID around the world because there was not the support services going in that were there before. I mean, the cost of that in terms of mental and physical suffering. And then, of course, the lost opportunity, as you've quoted, Noelle, you've quoted the figures. So I think it's becoming more mainstreamed as an issue, and I think a whole of society issue, whole of government issue, whole of policy issue, and that's important. But my goodness, it's increasing, it's getting newer forms, cybercrime and so on. And the prostitution, I want to take up what Annette said. I'm very keen to see more countries doing what we did in Ireland, what I did as Minister for Justice in the sexual offences legislation, criminalising the purchase of sexual services. There's certainly a move to do that in more European countries. And the vulnerability of women fleeing and children, 3.3 children as refugees at present. I mean, the vulnerability, given the unstable situation of some of those women and children to traffickers, is enormous in every country. No country is immune.
Absolutely. Annette, what are your thoughts on that?
I can really fully agree with Frances, because I think the first thing is not only in perspective of violence, but also in other politics. We have to count the costs. We have to show the figures and to make it transparent, to make it transparent how different behavior has consequences to our society. So it's very important to see that. And on in a second point, I also agree the best practice in EU is so important for every national parliament to see what works, what doesn't work, and we have to work much more together. We have to exchange our experiences, and therefore such a panel like this today is also a good possibility to deepen also these discussions. I will also underline that working with men is so important, because we will not have total equality only for us women, but we only achieve it with men. And there's very interesting how also international organizations work on that, not only in the industrialized countries, but also in the developing countries. How can we support young men in living in a life in total equality with the men? And in Germany, we just put a very strong focus in the supporting and helping infrastructure. We give more financial we give more money into establishing an infrastructure for the women which are most vulnerable or are victims of violence. And this is also very important, but I think it is not sufficient. We have to empower women with education, and then they are more resistant and more resilient against all the violence which is in a society and also in a family. So it's a long-term run, I think, but we have to start with helping, and then giving a good infrastructure and a good developing system for themselves.
Great, thank you, Annette. And I'm conscious that the clock is against us, so we've a question in here that I might ask you both to answer, and then if you want to give any concluding remarks, so we can wrap up. And it's a great question from Monica in the Fine Gael Women's Network. And Monica's question is around training, and she's wondering from the panel, is there any pan-European or even a global training body that could offer age-appropriate content on equality from aged 4 or 5 all the way through to third level and beyond? A child's outlook is still mostly left to chance based on their parents' norms and influence. And if you can't see it, you can't be it is very true and all very well. But if you are not hearing it from a young age, it's already too late by age 7 and definitely by age 15. So Frances, I might start with you. What do you think?
Yes.
On a really good point there?
I think what that question is saying, how do we make sure that we attack this, if you like, from a cultural and educational point of view across Europe? And I think everybody is trying. It's a bit like sex education. I've been very surprised at how poor sex education is right across Europe, actually. And it's kind of like, what's the best practice model is the question. I mean, I think there's masses of data out there. I mean, you come up against subsidiarity here in education systems, right? But it's a good point. I mean, there's obviously a lot of, different people and different partnerships and training that's available right across Europe. But like, to just put your hand on a model and take it to any one country, I don't think that's necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. certainly via the European institutions, you can access, and I'm so impressed with the research service, for example, of the European Parliament, you can access, quality materials on equality very easily. But then they're translated into each member state. So my kind of main point would be that the education system has to do this. And we've seen enormous improvements in terms of, mainstreaming gender equality, for example, into children's school books. We've seen progress in terms of dealing with bullying, and it all comes together. Now, the question is, like, can we drive it further at European level? Probably, and it may well be something that we could look at in the FAM committee and see, is there anything more that we can do from an educational point of view on data that you can kind of reach for the shelf almost. There's certainly basics, but as I say, the translation international is the key question. National educational systems. Let me just say that on this theme of democracy, I think, thank you for setting it up, Noelle and Konrad-Adenauer, Katie, because I do think we haven't talked enough about integrating like gender equality into multilateralism, and that's really critical when it comes to, to peacekeeping, dealing with conflict, and so on. I know our ambassador in the UN, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, is very interested in this and women in peace building and conflict, and has done work at UN level. But I think, you're still kind of fighting an uphill battle in terms of all of our member states, in terms of this add-on approach to gender equality, as opposed to really seeing the absolute essential value of it in the ways we've discussed this morning. So thanks again, Noelle.
Thank you, Frances. Thank you, Frances. That's excellent. Annette, over to you.
Yes, thank you. For me, I think also training has to be in the context of a country, of a society. It's you cannot have the one institution which offers one size fits all, because it's a very individual approach. Where do you come from? What are your expectations? And I think a very good thing are role models. As you see in Germany, as we had our chancellor for 16 years, young girls say, just also a man be possible or be able to become a chancellor. So they know a girl could reach everything if she wants, and if she is interesting, engaged, and so on. So I think we have to strengthen the self-consciousness. And on the other hand, we have to support all the institutions who put a focus on that and who integrate it not as a special program for a minority, but who integrate it in their whole programs Yes, so I will give a thank also to the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, because in Germany they have a special program for women to support them, to accompany them, and to help them to get the skills and to look behind the scenes how politics works, what they can do to get better in negotiating and so on. This is very important, and we could have more of them. And let me also add one aspect to the women in multilateralism. I think we focus in the crisis on the women. Now we see all these hundreds, million women and with their children who come to the neighbor states of the Ukraine. But in order to avoid these situations, we have to work much more in preventing these crises. And if we have a look on all the think tanks, the strategic boards there are discussing before the war started, you see the men. very few women in the boards. We host in Germany the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah.
In the officials conference, yes, you see more and more women participating. But if you look in the special panels in the side events, they're the economic leaders debate on the situation. You have a photo of 100% men. And there are the really problems, because to focus what is important, what are the relevant topics to be discussed, we need women who put it on the agenda. So our panel today means we need the women in, again, agenda setting, because then we can make the decisions. But if the topic is not on the agenda, nobody will see it. People will focus on it when it's too late, because then we have the war, we have the crisis, we have to do more in prevention, and there we need women at all.
Fantastic, Annette. So that call to action is that we need to set the agenda and create the agenda and drive that agenda. So I think that's on a great note to finish up this morning's proceedings, if I may. Thank you very much to Annette, to Francis, and to Ava. Really appreciate you all giving so generously of your time for such a fantastic panel discussion and debate and conversation, as you said, Francis, on this really important theme of supporting democracy. And on my own behalf, if I may, again, my thanks to Katie O'Connor and all our colleagues in the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. We're delighted here in European Movement Ireland to be partnering with them again. And I think really looking forward to our 2022 series of events on supporting democracy, which is more important than ever. For your valuable insights, thank you all again. To my colleagues in EM Ireland, thank you. And for the audience who have joined us this morning, for sharing your questions and your comments. Really appreciate the time. And until we meet again, take care, stay safe. Dankeschön, auf Wiedersehen, and thank you very much. Goodbye. Slán.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Noelle, everyone. Bye-bye, Annette.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks to you.